So, how's it going, guys? I just made a reply to Dendrophiliac's thing, but I think I'm gonna make another video because I was inspired to do so. Anyways, hi, how's it going? Yeah, and I know my video really sucks quality. I've said that before on my other ones. I'm getting a new cam soon, so I may even re-record this eventually. But to start, I started writing this piece particularly when I was trying to get out specifically how I look at my social interactions and how I actually go about doing them, if that makes any sense. I suppose it does. Anyways, I'm just gonna get right into this. My explicit perspectives. I'd like to start by saying that what drove me to write this is the apparent lack of understanding towards people's motives. For example, when someone experiences life and feels free to talk about it, there are those who feel to take those words spoken to such a personal extent that they allow their minds to enter personal dis-ease. Not disease, dis-ease. They become irate and agitated by the past events which have occurred and lose sight of the love and light. This very process, although seemingly initiated by the person outside of themselves saying the words, is actually a process within the individual allowing themselves to enter this phase. The phase itself provides no benefit towards the person. As a matter of fact, it acts as a strong setback and decrease in egoic vibration. Allowing the outside world to determine how you feel, rather than being the master of your own world, sets off a chain thought pattern of hopelessness. I'm going to sign out right now. Always is it disguised as an emotion which acts as our feedback towards destiny. But the negative influence and nature of the emotion is strong feedback as to your alignment at that moment, your own personal alignment. This becomes seemingly paradoxical, which means it kind of counteracts itself and kind of just, yeah, you know what I'm saying. And as we are told that if we're in a situation unfriendly to our destiny, we will receive negative feedback. But the ability to control that feedback provides one with the mastery of self and destiny. To allow yourself into the stream of victimization is to relinquish your own world by your own free will to that of those who are manipulating the outside situation. Of course, you bounce in and out of control of your world as you gain confidence, but always will the emotions return upon the memory of who has higher mastery. Just through a constant experience. If you're around somebody and they tend to be more dominant in situations than yourself, you will tend to slip back into that slave kind of state of mind. The memory itself does not play itself out like this in your mind though, but the negative feedback emotion returns upon reminder, which if left uncontrolled reduces one to the slave mentality. This, I believe, provides a basis for Friedrich Nietzsche's master and slave morality. I provided a link in the description of this particular video for you to access what that's all about. Nevertheless, speaking as one who controls his mastery to a relatively high degree, it becomes increasingly apparent of the necessity for those of slave morality, so the fact that they actually exist, until a global consciousness can be achieved. Otherwise, those who attempt to train their mastery at a time unbefitting of them, they may upset a balance of maturity. This is the plan of love and light, and this is the way of the world which filters out the image. And I stopped right there. And what I said next was, to scratch the writings above would be unfitting. But I will save to say that I have realized an evil presence which must be equalized. Like I said before in my previous response to Dendrophiliac, how if there's too much of a dominant force, there will be a counteracting equalizer. And that evil presence must be equalized upon reaching a personal mastery. I've begun to say, through ignorance, that there are certain people who deserve mastery before others, which I believe is simply not true. Every individual deserves the opportunity equally. However, there is a process to be thought out which will render the equality balanced. As, of course, when a person reaches mastery At early stages of human development, they begin to use the slaves, leaving them at a disadvantage because they believe that another master would rise against them. And that in itself is a pseudo form of mastery, because you feel that individuals in a future tense will control you from the outside. This very thought disables the human thought form of utopia, in my opinion, as we have reached a deadlock before the gates of true masters in the universe. In other words, as I've said, every individual deserves mastery whenever they wish it. We have but to show them the way, and they shall come on their own time. Until then, the masters who have already been initiated harvest and push forward the avenues of which the people may recognize their own mastery. To speak in terms of scientific principle, neurophysics steadily pointed out that the brain recognizes no difference between a memory of the past and a thought of the future. Basically, they've monitored the activity of a brain and gotten a person to recollect things that are past events, and they've had them then afterwards think and visualize their future, and the brain used the same faculties for both. So the brain recognizes no difference between the two thoughts of past and future, and with this in mind, one must realize that when he or she drops back into slave mentality is when they recall events of the past which arouse negative feedback. For example, in a situation of two people completely unaware of the concepts of this that I'm talking about, we'll name the first Nathan and the other Chris. The individuals encounter a conflict of interest. Confidence is a prime factor in mastery, and so he with more confidence in true form will intimidate the other more so that he shall regain mastery in the situation. The other will revert to slavery as he views the event as a loss. So, Nathan and Chris argue over money. Typical. They begin to fight, and Nathan retains control over his feedback. Perhaps he's physically stronger, so that's why mastery of your physical form is a good thing. Whereas Chris becomes intimidated and doubts his world. Therefore, negative feedback plays forth, and he loses mastery in the situation. In the future, when Chris sees Nathan, memories of the encounter return, and the emotions of a negative variety play out, dipping him from his solitary mastery to group slavery. In order for Chris to have retained mastery, he either would have had to retain confidence and be in control of feedback so to more properly clarify the situation, or the problem may have stemmed from a dip into slavery during the root cause of the issue, which upon memory would have further played its toll. Of course, confidence also could have uprocked the past slavery and ingenuitively attained compromise. Thus, he is always in control if he has the proper mindset. In other words, you have the power. So, upon realizing that recollection of the past can drop you to slavery, it becomes apparent that thoughts to the future can drop one away from mastery as well. Of course, when one has mastered past mastery, they cannot fall behind the 0.5, so to speak. But in order to reach the 1, we must master our future mastery. This will provide us with a basis for relinquishing the overhanded control implemented by those who have reached the 0.5. The fear of the future overpowering you is the downfall. Unity is true when equality is well thought out. Thank you very much for your time.